Former CEO of Yukos Oil, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, was arrested on allegations of fraud and tax evasion on October 25, 2003 by the Russian authorities. His real crime was to have stepped into the political arena. Yukos was taken over by Kremlin insiders, and he himself was sent to a labor camp for 8 years in Siberia after a show trial in Moscow. On trial on trumped-up charges again in 2010, Khodorkovsky's fate is being watched as the bellwether of Russian legal reforms and its democratic development. Russia's relationship with the West hangs in the balance. At Novosibirsk airport, Russian special forces stormed Khodorkovsky's plane and arrested him. He was en route to Siberia to make a provocative speech on power, business and society at the School of Public Policy in Irkutsk. In the years preceding his arrest, Khodorkovsky had turned Yukos Oil around from the brink of bankruptcy to the international big league. Through radical restructuring, he brought global best practice to Yukos, increasing efficiencies from operations to management. Under Khodorkovsky's stewardship, Yukos grew into one of the largest and most successful businesses in Russia, and one of the country's biggest taxpayers. Khodorkovsky's interest extended outside business into philanthropy. He created the Open Russia Foundation in 2001 and invested in a diversity of programs across education and science, civil society, freedom of press, leadership and cultural development. It was his active interest in politics that would prove fateful. He supported opposition parties and by 2003 publicly confronted Russian President Vladimir Putin about the ruinous impact of state corruption.
So the corruption level, which is evaluated by the experts of 4 independent organizations, is approximately equals to approximate $30 billion, which is 10-12% of GDP.
Putin responded angrily.
Also, I would like to mention in regards to the payment of taxes or unpayment of taxes. We have recently discussed with you, specifically your company had this type of problems with unpayment of the taxes.
The Kremlin considered Khodorkovsky to be too great a threat. The arrest of his business partner Platon Lebedev in July 2003 was a warning shot, but Khodorkovsky did not flinch. He could have escaped and become a political émigré, but stayed on for, in his own words, "Because I love Russia and believe in its future as a strong and law-governed state." When they finally arrested Khodorkovsky in October, the ruble went into freefall and stock markets were closed for the first time in their history. Spooked foreign investors swiftly withdrew $9.5 billion of Russian investments. 2 months after Khodorkovsky's arrest, his company, Yukos, became the target. A special re-audit of the company's accounts by Russia's tax authorities resulted in accusations of massive tax evasion. Back taxes for 2000-2004 exceeded Yukos's entire revenues for the same period. While demanding payment of back taxes amounting to billions of dollars, the authorities simultaneously froze Yukos's assets, making it impossible for the company to pay its debts. The company was paralyzed and forced to surrender its prized assets in state-enforced bankruptcy auctions at fire sale prices. Kremlin-controlled Rosneft scooped up the majority of Yukos in the process. When the core production unit of Yukos was sold for a fraction of its value in a single-bid auction in December 2004, Andrei Illarionov, the Kremlin's head economic advisor, described the sale as the scam of the year. He soon tendered his resignation in protest over the Yukos affair. Notwithstanding the outcry at home and abroad, Khodorkovsky and Lebedev were put on trial. The defendants had gone from being captains of free market liberalization to a metal cage. The Western world watched in dismay as Russia's judicial and political integrity were put on trial with them. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was found guilty of all the trumped-up charges in May 2005 and sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. He was transferred to prison camp YAG 14/10 in Siberia. In violation of Russian and international law, he remained in Siberia for the next 2 years, 6,000 kilometers from his family and home.
He is a political prisoner. He has in his case, all the indications of political persecution.
His imprisonment has attracted strong criticism at home and in the West.
I will be very cautious in calling what we're doing in Russia now politics, because people could get confused. Politics is about campaigning, fundraising, debating the opponents. In Russia, we're not trying to win elections, we're trying to have elections.
In 2005, US Senate Resolution 322, a bill co-sponsored by Senators Barack Obama, John McCain and Joe Biden, stated that the criminal cases against Khodorkovsky are politically motivated and that they raise troubling questions about the integrity of the judicial system in Russia. This was followed by condemnation of the trial across Europe, with courts in Switzerland, the Netherlands, Spain, and the UK all declaring that the Russian state's pursuit of Khodorkovsky and of Yukos' assets to be politically motivated. Meanwhile, Khodorkovsky, Lebedev, and Yukos appealed the final judgments and destruction of the company to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And while the processes are ongoing, decisions to date have favoured their claims against the Russian state. The Strasbourg court has found these appeals on fundamental violations of human rights raise serious issues of fact and law, which are now being considered as the court prepares a decision. But worldwide scrutiny of the case did little to deter Russian authorities. In February 2007, just months before Khodorkovsky was eligible for release on parole, and 1 year before President Putin was due to step down as president, the Russian authorities leveled new charges of embezzlement and money laundering against him and his friend and business partner, Platon Lebedev.
The charges contain approximately 150 pages. When you try and describe those 150 pages, it's just raving dribble, hair splitting and mind splitting, and with an unhealthy dose of schizophrenia on top. Which, as absurd as they are, the charges, should they prove to be confirmed, corroborated and confirmed by the court, are likely to add a considerable amount of prison time to the defendants, which is why they are so tragic.
To any onlooker, the charges of embezzlement and money laundering appear immediately absurd. The quantity of oil allegedly embezzled and laundered is equal to Yukos' entire production over a 6-year period. Yet the prosecution cannot identify the whereabouts of any embezzled oil, given the strictly state-controlled pipelines and the company's proven sales revenues. Nor can prosecutors decide whether the oil was sold and taxable, as alleged in the first trial, or stolen, as alleged in this case. Nevertheless, the authorities were undeterred. The Kamovno-Chesky District Court in Moscow opened a trial on March 3, 2009. Having investigated the prosecution's case, the defense lawyers filed for the dismissal of all charges. The court denied the motion, along with all others filed by the defense at the preliminary hearings. This began a disheartening trend for the defense, who were forced to accept that only 5 of their 155 motions filed during the trial proceedings will be granted. The move confounded independent observers throughout the world, including the world's most powerful man, President Barack Obama, who said, "It does seem odd to me that these new charges, which appear to be a repackaging of the old charges, should be surfacing now, years after these 2 individuals have been in prison and as they become eligible for parole." The artificial nature of the court proceedings was affirmed over the next 18 months. Over 81 witnesses testified at the trial. None of the prosecution witnesses were able to say anything about the embezzlement of 350 million metric tons of oil. All defense witnesses, including former Russian Prime Minister Kasyanov, former Russian Economics and Trade Minister Gref, former Russian Central Bank Chairman Gerashenko, and current Russian Industry Minister Krystenko, were unanimous. There was no evidence of embezzlement. Judge Viktor Danilkin is also complicit in the sham trial.
Judge Danilkin is feeling very bored. Why? Because he's tired, or maybe he already knows all this will end up.
Yet despite the Kafkaesque and political nature of this trial, there is hope. On March 8, 2008, German Chancellor Angela Merkel stated that Germany would welcome the release of Khodorkovsky from prison. Chancellor Merkel again expressed concerns about Khodorkovsky during President Medvedev's visit to Berlin on June 5, 2008. The Khodorkovsky trial is increasingly seen as the test of the current Russian president's power. Less than a year before the trial began, Russia had sworn in President Dmitry Medvedev, a self-proclaimed modernizer, who has staked his presidency on his promise to fight against corruption, for the independence of Russian courts, and to put an end to legal nihilism in Russia. For many, it is a pledge that depends on the outcome of the Khodorkovsky trial. As the 2012 presidential election approaches, and with Prime Minister Putin seeking a return to his prior seat of power, Khodorkovsky is now viewed as synonymous with the reform movement and the litmus test of the future of a modernized and democratic Russia.
The European Union is following very closely the court proceedings against Mikhail Khodorkovsky and Platon Lebedev, and the European Parliament has a duty to see that Russia follows rule of law, and we have serious doubts obviously about the political character of this court case.
We're very, very concerned, and I think the effect that the trial and the detention is having on Russia's international image I think is very unhelpful. What we would like to see is for him to be released, or at least to be given a fair trial.
This trial is symbolic of anything in Russia. On the one hand, Russia's President Medvedev wants that the rule of law has to be developed in Russia. On the other hand, we see such a trial which mocks rule of law. In this example, the fundamental rights of the defendants are trampled on. The prosecution makes a fool of itself, but is not able to prove any accusations.
A decision which will set free Khodorkovsky and Lebedev in 2011, when their 8-year sentence expires, is still a possibility and would mark a watershed moment in Russian history. A moment of rapprochement, when international investors and foreign governments could look anew at Russia's limitless potential, and a point when Russia's people could know that a meaningful reform and a fairer civil society were at last attainable for their country.